Today we will be discussing about how personal care is being impacted by the recent situation. And tomorrow we will be doing a deep dive into food, and we will share the link to register in the chat box as well. And every week, we will continue doing these deep dives into the sectors. And please do send us a message with your email address. So if you would like to hear more about the future ones. So I am Bahar. I'm one of the client partners here at Streetbees, and co-presenting with me is Stephanie, one of our deployment strategists, working very closely with our personal care industry. So just a couple of reminders. You can see the questions function, so feel free to raise a point or ask questions. We won't be able to address all of them, but we will do our best. And if we haven't addressed your question, we will be coming back to you afterwards with a follow-up. If there is any technical problem, please bear with us. We are still learning how to manage a digital discussion at this scale. And we will send the webinar recording afterwards if needed as well. And we will navigate through our COVID-19 human impact dashboard. So I recommend you use your full screen or the Zoom for the best quality. So, Steph, should we look at how different countries are feeling right now?
Sure, thanks, Bahar. So if we start with our main page of our dashboard, you can see here that this is really looking at the emotional impact in terms of the different countries. So we're going to be looking at 10 different countries today, as you can see the highlighted ones on the screen. And if you want to compare, we can see that the pandemic is actually affecting people from their emotional standpoint in very different ways. So if we look at India, for instance, you can see that India is actually over-indexing on being scared and paranoid. As you can imagine, because they haven't had as many cases, they're bracing to see if the pandemic is going to start showing a crescendo in that country. Or if you look at that comparatively versus parts of Europe and France and in the US, you can actually see that anxiousness and stress is starting to come out more as you're starting to see a larger increase in terms of cases and even deaths happening in the country as we continue towards another week of lockdown. However, if you kind of look in comparison, you can also see India actually has an overall good and a very positive mood. Now, one of the reasons here is that they started doing testing a lot earlier than other countries, and so they're able to kind of contain it a lot better than other parts of Europe. So there's still quite a high morale within Germany versus some of the other countries. And then lastly, if we move over to over to China, you can see actually that the morale is quite good and positive. And again, that's increasing week on week as you start to see the restrictions lifted and as you start to stop seeing any new cases coming out of the country. Obviously, this has changed quite drastically since a few weeks ago, since it was one of the most affected countries from the COVID-19.
Yeah, we have seen them consistently actually coming across as very negative, but it's really interesting to see how that shifted over the last few weeks actually. So.
Cool, so if we move on to kind of looking at the fear index, so now that we understand kind of the mood that's happening in the country, you can see week to week what's happening in terms of the kind of fear index. And what this is really looking at is that we're taking the kind of percentage that are saying that they're afraid versus those who aren't and coming up with an index figure by country and looking on this week on week here. So you can see here this from a China perspective, as we talked about. You can see the fear index actually dropping week to week as we talked about the restrictions lifting, where actually you're starting to see fearfulness increase, especially around countries like India that are bracing to see if something's going to happen. And then obviously in the US, you've seen a drastic increase week to week as you see the increase in cases. However, if we kind of look all the way down, you can see that Korea now actually has more of a positive outlook as they've been able to contain themselves quite quickly. So now, Bahar, let's talk, now that we know about emotional and fear levels, what's the impact on purchasing, especially in personal care?
Yeah, of course, let's have a look. So, so this chart actually shows the percentage of increase in consumption minus the percentage of decreasing. So we're not capturing volume here, it captures change in consumer demand relative to other categories. So globally, personal hygiene products are actually #1 on the list. even before cleaning products and even before food. Purchase in skincare is increasing, but not by a lot, while beauty purchases have been decreasing lately. So this is not a key focus for people right now, clearly. But we might see that change as people look to pamper themselves at home as a treat, and as working from home becomes a new normal. So makeup may also see an increase once people start to look for normalcy in their abnormal situation. So now that we have seen overall the purchasing behavior, let's maybe look by country and to understand, like, how some of those emotions that you talked about are impacting behaviors as such. So we have seen that India, Germany, and UK had very different levels when it comes to their mood and feelings. So how does that reflect on what they are buying? So in India, which is a very paranoid state of mood at the moment, demand in personal care products is the highest compared to other categories. Whereas for the UK, personal care is important, and it's ranking in one of the top products being high in demand, which is close to food. But when we look at Germany, which is still in a quite positive spirit, personal care products are not really at the top of the priority list. We see that their purchase index for that category is actually low versus the global average.
So then if we move on to stockpiling, as you guys can see here, obviously this has been quite a hot topic. I'm sure everybody has experienced the waits in the grocery stores, whether the lines outside or kind of the difficulties of finding certain products. And actually what we found here is that in general we found that 37% of people are planning on stockpiling. And unsurprisingly, we see quite a few personal care products actually at the top in terms of ones that they're planning on stockpiling. So no surprise here that toilet paper features heavily. We also see hand sanitizer. General personal care products are also seen here, and disinfectants. But the question is do people actually need these products? We've seen the pictures of people, having, 24 rolls of toilet paper stashed, and it's kind of that question of, are these people actually really needing this, or is this kind of a reaction to kind of the extreme measures of being in lockdown? And what's really interesting about the Streetbees platform is that we're actually able to talk to our bees through open text. And so for here, if we want to highlight one of the quotes here, a female from the US who's 29 years old talks about the fact that she was able to only get one brand of toilet paper, one brand of kitchen roll, kitchen spray cleaner, and one extra shampoo and conditioner, and some extra loaf of bread. But basically, it's that idea that they're only able to get so much, and that there's a huge frustration about being able to get the products that they're looking for. And so we can see that people are buying more because of the lack of clarity and not knowing what stocks are going to be available once they get to the stores themselves.
Okay, interesting. So shall we start deep diving into the personal care dashboard then, Steph?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. So when we look at, how purchasing is actually evolving on the personal care category specifically, so we see hand wash, sanitizers, and soaps seeing the highest demand as people increasingly want to keep their hands clean. However, obviously an unintended effect of the skin, as I'm sure like every one of you is experiencing at the moment, is skin is feeling drier and drier because we are using products that aren't really intended to be used so regularly, especially the ones with more disinfectants. So this helps to show how brands need to change their communications around it. As consumers need change, priorities will shift, and they will need to be there to meet those changing concerns.
Sorry, let me just get one of the charts ready. Apologies, guys. So now if we scroll down here to kind of look at the changing in habits and practices, that a lot of this is driven by concern around germs. As you can see here, that we're starting to see people have a really high concern around germs, and this is actually really affecting the frequency for different personal care behaviors. So for instance, we're seeing hand wash frequency overall become quite high. And actually, we're also starting to see an increase in shower frequency as well. So one example is just looking at the US in comparison, is that actually the US you're seeing isn't as high globally, but we do think that we're going to see, as we look at this week to week, we're going to be able to see this increase week on week, just for an example of how we're going to be looking at the data. So the question is, in terms of here, is what is that kind of direct correlation with the hand wash frequency and shower frequency? And again, like I said, a lot of this has to do around with germs. You know, a lot of, especially if you look at the US, is that people weren't as fearful. It wasn't being taken as seriously in the country up until really quite recently, about a week and a half ago. And so in comparison, while other countries have been bracing for weeks, the US is only starting to see kind of higher concern levels and starting to increase their personal care behavior, especially around hand wash.
Yeah.
So in terms of, so these are some of the trends that we think that these are going to be new habits that are emerging, especially around people looking at more antibacterial products and being able to kind of increase different personal care and change their personal care regimes. But what other things do we think are actually going to stick? Bahar, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's really interesting. So will more frequent hand washing will continue, because now we are almost, you know, transforming how we behave so drastically. So will people continue to use hand sanitizers? Will we see, like, you know, just becoming really more commonplace in practice and hygiene overall? And with people being much more aware now, once we are out of the house again, so what does that mean for the out-of-home sector? Like, how will they respond? So will the restaurants, for example, like, you know, have to provide more easily to customers some hand sanitizers? Will wet wipes become more of commonplace? You know, will hygiene standards become more stringent? And also, like, interestingly, what will you know, sustainability you know, mean in that sense? Because wipes have been you know, quite of a discussion recently, and people, as people are becoming more and more, you know, sustainably conscious, then actually the wipes were really seeing a lot of decline. But what will that mean after the pandemic is all over? So for example, in China, while we see trends softening right now, we still see quite a high proportion of people continuing hygiene habits, especially around hands, body, and face.
So now that we kind of have a little bit of understanding of where the trends may be, let's kind of discuss, what does this mean for brands? What does this mean for you? And we want to talk through some kind of thought starters that we want you guys to kind of take away from this in terms of how can you apply these to different strategies that you're trying to create kind of during the pandemic, and also kind of how you have to switch kind of communications or possibly directions for brands after the pandemic. So one of the big education pieces here is that we're talking to our bees around what they actually want to hear from brands. So finding out in their own words, really around what do we want to hear from a personal hygiene brand about coronavirus. At the end of the day, let's just go to the source and ask them, what do they want to know and what's going to drive their brand usage? So here, you know, we kind of, what they really want to hear is around the effectiveness of the product on the virus and bacteria. You know, globally, you've got 34% of people, so 1 in 3 people are wanting to make sure that what they're using to protect themselves and to protect their family. But at the same time, we really want to make sure that brands aren't using this in a way to kind of take advantage of any fear or anxiety of people and play on that. But really, they need to kind of become a pillar, become reliable for consumers, because they're putting their faith into you to protect them and their family and to keep them clean. That's why we see the effectiveness coming through. So one of the quotes here that we thought was really interesting is that from a female in the US, she's 45 years old. She's saying, I guess if it's something that kills coronavirus, that would be good to know. Kind of how we were seeing kind of the H1N1 on wipes as of kind of a few years ago. Otherwise, they'd like to see companies stating what they are doing in this pandemic, not just what they are doing for their employees, such as telling them to work from home and not travel. I want to see companies who are donating money for masks and gloves for the healthcare workers, or coming up with creative ways to reward folks who can sew or who donate needed items. So again, a big part of kind of communication strategy for brands in the past couple of years has been around purpose. So you're actually seeing consumers that are really wanting to understand how are brands playing a part here without trying to take advantage of the current situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we're now starting to see a lot of the, cosmetics brands actually, producing hand sanitizers, having some partnerships. I've just saw Garnier, for instance, just announced a collaboration with retailers. So it's really interesting, like how brands are reacting, and that is definitely seems like it's the right way to go, Steph. So let's look at also maybe like the pack sizes, because there is a lot of like implication in terms of frequency, in terms of like how people buy. So people's usage is going up, so people will be definitely buying more pack sizes, and brands need to think about their stock available in those different sizes, while people are buying using more and shopping less. Also, when it comes to refillable has really become one of the important topics recently, that the brands are really, starting to consider as people become more environmentally focused. But now there is also an additional need here. So it's not just about like reducing the use of plastic, but also not bringing these contaminated items at home. So we will definitely start seeing increase in these larger pack sizes and the refillable alternatives. So help to ease this panic buying. Remember that the play is still around availability. With personal care products in demand, people will buy what's on the shelf, not necessarily their favorites at this point, especially as stores are reducing promotions. So Steph, before we start like moving towards the end, so we have a question which I think we can quickly address. So a couple of questions, but I'm going to like pick some of the priority ones. So how does epidemics impact usage of deos and shampoos? I think this is not maybe in the directly personal care and hygiene. We'll be able to see like how it's impacting deos, but also like it will be interesting to maybe jump into the hair care and dashboard to see like how some interesting insights are coming out in terms of usage.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, so in terms of what's really key here is that kind of purchase and usage relationship. So as you can see here is in terms of kind of the purchase index, we are actually seeing deodorants increase slightly, not as high as some of the other categories, but we are seeing that here. And then again, people are saying that they're purchasing more, but not as much. Now, one of the things here is that unfortunately with the home lockdowns, deodorant's going to be most affected, mainly for the reason that you tend to use deodorant when you're going out or being around groups of people. So you tend to see that kind of happening less. So it's not as much of a priority as it would be around getting soap or sanitizer or hand wash. So it becomes more of that secondary product to attain. So we would expect to see a reduced usage on deodorant from week to week. So then we look at hair care as well, just as another example. So just to go into the hair care database here, is that actually you're starting to see more of again, the purchase, you're starting to see an increase around shampoo. And really interestingly enough, you have that kind of correlation between shampoo and dry shampoo, which actually, has quite a high usage aspect of dry shampoo, but we're not seeing that coming through because people really want to make sure that they're clean, that when they do go out of the house, they want to make sure that they're clean in the house. Their house is free from the virus if they have brought it in the house, and making sure that they're not spreading it. So we would expect to see some. It's kind of, for hair care, it's an interesting one because you're going to see that dichotomy of people either increasing kind of their cleaning routines and their care routines in terms of shampooing and washing. However, at the same time, you will see another group of people that because they're working from home, that they're actually going to be kind of decreasing it. So what you might actually see is these two kind of cancel each other out. But I think we still need to wait another week or so to make sure that we can see kind of how these patterns are coming out. Because right now we are seeing slight increases, but they still, because of the canceling of each other out, they tend to be on an average behavior. As you can see here, the same amount is still kind of being here, where actually the less frequency is at 10% and then 35 is here. So that's why we're saying we're still at around an average.
Okay, so I have more questions that I will try to address here. So a question is, how many countries are we covering? So as part of the human impact trackers, also there is a question around how we collect data and how long we have been collecting. So let me just quickly explain how that works. So at Streetbees, we capture human behavior in their moments of truth. So we have a Streetbees app. It's a WhatsApp live conversation that we have with our community community all around the world, and we have conversations with them, and this is how we capture our data. And so we started capturing this around now, I think 11-12 weeks ago almost, Steph, in China. So when this first pandemic started happening, we wanted to understand what's going on in China as people stay in, and we started tracking like all of this metrics that you saw, how is it like impacting them, their emotions, their mood, but also like what is changing in their consumption and shopping behaviors. And we then started tracking US and UK, and then we started adding more countries as countries started to be impacted as this became a pandemic. So our core 10 tracker, as we call it, tracks 10 most impacted countries, and we are also like adding more and more countries as they become more impacted by the pandemic as well moving forward. Yeah, I hope that answers your questions. And if you have any other questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. So we are, coming towards our end. Thank you very much for joining us. And if there's any specific category you would like us to talk about, please write it in the chat box, and we will be following up with all the questions that we weren't able to answer, and we will be reaching out to you. Please do join our webinar tomorrow about the food industry as well. And thank you very much for your time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay home.